Go for it.
Okay, so I'm here with, tell us a little bit about your history. I know she told me, but for people who don't know who you are.
I'm Micheal Gottlieb. I'm David Gottlieb's grandson, Alvin Gottlieb's son. My grandfather started the Gottlieb and Company in 1927. My dad, my uncle ran it from 1947 to 1977, where they sold it to Columbia Pictures. I personally worked at Dady's Pinball. I spent 15 years at Williams Valley Midway, and that's my background.
Wow, okay. And can you tell me a little bit about what's been the most rewarding thing about pinball for you in your life?
The most rewarding thing about pinball is that it's relaxing. Roger Sharp and I are good friends, and like Roger says, when you're playing pinball, you can't think about anything else. It's a lot of fun. It's recreational, and it's like my grandfather said when he made baffle ball in 1931. It was during the Great Depression, and people were having a very difficult time. And his feeling was that if he could create entertainment, 7 balls for 1 penny, if it could take people's minds off of how bad things were and give them some escape, that was a good thing. And that's really been the driving force behind, kind of the Gottlieb pinball philosophy ever since then, to give people an escape and give them some amusement.
Wow, when we need that. We need those times to relax.
Yes.
And escape and forget some of the pressures that we live with every day.
Right, absolutely.
And I for one, just am so grateful for what your family has done and that you persevered through the hard seasons and lean times of pinball.
Yeah,
and that it's still here. And I just want to let you know that as a parent of 3 children, I am working to correct my debacle of not teaching my kids about pinball when they were growing up.
Right.
They're here
And
now.
so
Good,
I am taking it seriously to finish the job well and bring them here, and they love it. I have my son here, and he lives in California. I live in Georgia, and pinball brings people together.
It does. It's we've obviously always had machines in the house, and I always played with my father and other family members, and had a lot of fun with it. One of the things that's been occurring to me lately, as I'm getting older, and people sometimes don't kind of do the math on this. David Gottlieb was born in 1900. The significance of that is that he was 47 years old in 1947 when the flipper was invented.
Wow.
So, they were and they survived through World War II and contributed to the war effort and made parachute hooks and were involved with emergency rafts. They made emergency rafts in case people had to bail out of boats and so on and so forth. But the point being is that the heyday didn't even start in many ways until 1947 with the invention of the flipper. And he was he was born in 1900, so do the math. Slick Chick, he was 63 years old when that game came out. So some of the greatest, the Gottlieb wedge heads and all that. And what's neat is that all the way through his life, he loved pinball, never stopped. Absolutely loved pinball and never stopped, and my father was the same way, and I think I'll always be the same way. And my kids both play as well.
Oh, keep that legacy going.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, what is it about pinball that draws people into your opinion?
Well, I think there's a natural curiosity from when we start as children. When you see something, you want to figure out what it does and how it works. Right? They still make the Fisher-Price plastic lawnmower. You push it and it's got a ball popper in there and the balls pop.
Yes, I remember that.
Well, what draws people to pinball is the expression on a child's face when they discover that the first time.
Don't
right?
we all feel that when we look at pinball?
Yeah, exactly. And I think also in the same way, it's important that pinball is accessible. That for somebody who's never played before, they can have some fun. I am so happy about the Beatles pinball machine.
Are you?
I mean, the theme is obviously a fantastic theme,
Absolutely.
but I think going back to a more traditional layout, like something like Sea Witch, where anybody can just walk up and flip the flippers and have a good time, I think it's good. I think it gets people into pinball. And I distinctly remember working at Williams and my father looking at the machines, and he didn't know what was going on. He couldn't follow it, and he had done it his whole life, right? So if somebody that's done it his whole life is challenged figuring it out, what hope is for the rest is for the people that are just, walking up to it. So I think it's incumbent upon the pinball manufacturers to continue to make the games easy to learn, hard to master.
Absolutely.
And I think you can see with the success of mobile phone casual gaming, how casual gaming is so popular, that there is the broadest market for entertainment is accessible entertainment. Yes, there's Fortnite. Yes, there's first-person shooters and games that require tons and tons and tons. There's always been that. There's always been Dungeons and Dragons in varying forms, right? But I think that the broadest market is achieved when you've got something that's accessible, and you don't plunge the ball and drain 3 times in a row, because then you turn people off to pinball. And that's what we don't want to do.
Sure.
So that's my philosophy on this.
I am tracking with you. And I'm from somebody who's new to pinball. I can get overwhelmed with the scoring and the rule sets and the stacking of points. And I just, like you say, want to be able to walk up to a machine and feel like I'm able to have fun with it without brick shots, which I want to be able to be somewhat successful and want to be able to have it draw me back in.
Right.
And I really like what you said too about the childlikeness that pinball kind of brings out in people. I do feel exactly what he's talking about. When I walk up to a pinball machine, I feel like I'm 10 years old. Or I started playing when I was 12 years old, and it just causes those warm, toasty feelings of fun, lightheartedness, entertainment that is engaging. It's not just me sitting, trying, like relaxing in front of a TV screen or something. It's a different type of engagement with pinball.
Right.
It is relaxing and challenging. And like you said, I never thought of the aspect though of not being able to think about anything else. I feel like my brain is more on fire and popping and firing on all 8 cylinders, which doesn't happen very often with this chick. And when I'm playing pinball, because I just feel like my life is pinball. I mean, this is what happens in my brain right here when the ball is going all over the place. It just feels like I can relate to it. But I do think we all need to have that childlike innocence and that childlike wonder of, hey, what's this going to do?
Right.
How's this put together? And I also think pinball draws some of the best people because they do have that lighthearted, childlike, don't take life too seriously mentality, I think. So I really have met some of the nicest people, and Moto being one of them, in pinball. So I thank you so much for sharing with me and doing this little questionnaire and giving me knowledge that I didn't have before, and even perspectives that I hadn't considered before. So thank you so much, and for your legacy.
Thank you very much.
Great legacy.
To your point of putting the coin in and wanting to see what it would do, the joke at D. Gottlieb and Company that my dad used to tell me as well is you could put a cardboard box with a quarter slot on a bar counter, and somebody would put a quarter in it to see what it would do, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that getting the first quarter isn't necessarily difficult. Yes, you need the art to draw the player in and the flashing lights, but it's the second quarter and the third quarter and the long-term repeatability of a game that really defines its success,
Yes.
And I think the other thing, in an environment like this too, you can really see the contrast. People always say, well, what's the difference between the older games and the newer games? And yeah, solid state, sure, whatever, and the more complicated rule sets to an extent. To me, the fundamental difference is when pinball was invented, it was almost primarily luck because you didn't have flippers. I mean, you could nudge and move the machine around a little bit. With the invention of the flippers, skill as a component was probably about 50%. If you look at Humpty Dumpty and even through the 60s and into the 70s, I would say that luck was a meaningful percentage of the gameplay experience. And the challenge now is some of these games, it's 100% skill.
Yeah.
And that's not good for the average player. Because if you play some of these older games, even if you just kind of flip the flippers together, you're going to get some pop bumpers, things are going to happen. And if you're having luck, right? And the other thing that's fascinating is the greatest pinball players in the world struggle on the older games because no matter how good you are, it's harder to trap the ball, you don't have return lanes, you can't pump the same ramp shot 500 times in a row.
Right.
That's like Harry Williams said, the ball is wild. So anytime I hear people talk about Gary Stern saying, yeah, Gary told John Borg or George Gomez, feed the ball back to the pop bumpers, that's why. Because you want an additional element of luck into it to give the mere mortals a fighting chance. So Makes a difference.
And us mere mortals love the EMs and the older pins that are simplistic enough to just walk up after a hard day at work and play.
That's exactly right.
And that's what we appreciate that. Love Spirit 76.
Oh yes.
Pioneer.
Yes.
One of my best memories as a 12-year-old was playing split flippers with my older brother at the arcade, and the way I got into pinball was my brother passed away from suicide right before I got married, and we didn't do anything to memorialize him because my mom, it just wasn't,
right.
And so now years later, I'm trying to process this grief, and I said the best memory I have of my brother is playing Spirit 76 together. And when I saw the number 76, on one side, 1976 on one side and 1776 on the other side, it just got me right here. And I teared up. And I said, Tim, I want to have that pin as a memorial to my brother. And then we moved into an Evel Knievel pin by Bali because that was another pin that we played with together.
Sure.
And who didn't remember Evel Knievel? So I got a plaque that says in memory of Mark Gerard Jackson, birth and death, and it says, "You mattered to me." And I put that plaque on the crossbar of the pin, and every time I play it, I feel like we're playing split flippers. It's a spiritual thing. It's a religious thing. I don't know how to explain it other than it's supernatural. But that's my pinball story.
That's a great story.
And I just wanted to share that with you and let you know that there's an emotional attachment to these machines because I think exactly what you already said, it's a full body experience. It's every sense, touch, I guess smell if you burn them up like I do.
Oh my gosh, the EM smells so good
They
inside.
do. I get that smell and I go straight back to the arcade. Anyway, sight, sound, it's all encompassing. And how old was your dad when he started, or your grandfather?
How old?
67?
When he started the company, he would have been 31 years old.
Okay, when he started
Yeah,
it, but
my
when
dad
the flipper,
the flipper was not invented until 47.
Yeah, so he was 65.
He was 47 years
Okay.
old in 1947, and my dad had just come out of World War II, and he had gone to work at D. Gottlieb and Company, and he was in the engineering department with Harry Mabs, and they were playing around. They were always experimenting in the engineering department, but he was basically playing around with a flipper bat that was supposed to be automatic. It was supposed to flip itself. Whenever a switch would hit, the bat would flip. And then in the process of wiring it, the wires came apart within the cabinet. And Dad said Harry went under there and he put the wires back together and the flipper flipped. And Harry realized that he was physically able to make the flippers flip by touching the two wires together. And the light bulb went off, and that's where the idea came from. Well, we've got to put some type of button on here. And of course, the baseball batter games had existed prior to that point, but that was a single button in the middle of the lockdown bar. But they had thought, well, okay, so they had these flippers on both sides because that's the way they envisioned it. And they thought, okay, well, let's put the flipper buttons one on each side. And it was such a great idea. They put 3 up and down the left and 3 up and down the right, and ended up with 6 flippers.
Okay, I remember seeing a picture of that pinball machine. That's gold right there. That's gold right there. That story, that is awesome story. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
You're welcome.
And another thing that's really encouraging about what you said is it's never too late to get involved in pinball, because look at how late it was in life that it really started in your family.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm a latecomer. Well, I'm a recomer into it at an older age.
I think ultimately my grandfather's story is that it's never too late to be successful at anything you want to do.
Never stop living.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right? It's never too late. And I'm glad Spirit of 76 was, I remember when that game came out. That was
I do too.
Amazing and absolutely.
It was a great game.
Yeah.
And the back glass and the art for that with the Pioneer and everything on it, that's my favorite. It's so beautiful.
And yeah, Ed Krinsky was a wonderful man. And Wayne Nyens is an amazing man. My father came to work at D. Gottlieb and Company in the engineering department, and he sat next to Wayne Nyens. And my dad was a kid, he was younger than Wayne. And Wayne and my father hit it off at that point and became friends and professional colleagues. But from 1947 until 1980, when my dad and my Uncle Judd and Wayne all basically retired from the company, they worked together every single day. And remain friends after that point. And it's amazing to me. The greatest thing that ever happened at D. Gottlieb and Company was that Jimmy Johnson was a pain in the rear. Because Jimmy Johnson was originally Wayne's boss, and it was only because Jimmy Johnson wasn't willing to give Wayne a raise and take care of him that Wayne was ended up, coming to work at D. Gottlieb and Company. And Jimmy Johnson came after him, after my grandfather, and said, "Did you hire a guy named Wayne Nyens?" And my grandfather said, "Yeah." They had a go about it. And Jimmy Johnson was basically demanding that they fire Wayne Nyens. Now, Jimmy Johnson was well over 6 feet tall. He was a big, big guy. Dave Gottlieb was shorter than I was. But Dave Gottlieb, nobody pushed him around. Right. So according to my dad, he got in Jimmy Johnson's face and said, "We're done. It's time for you to go." And then he went down onto the production line and he found the kid, Wayne Nyens, and he said, "Wayne, as long as you want to work here at D. Gottlieb and Company, you will always have a job." And that was the beginning of a very, very long friendship.
Wow. And look at all the friendships. That friendship was birthed by.
Yes, exactly.
I can't begin to name all the friends that I've made, even in just the last 7 months. So I think there's something very unique and special just because of that mentality that he brought, the integrity, the character, and that I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to treat you right, the respect.
Yeah, exactly.
The respect, and I think that does sort of penetrate through pinball.
Yeah,
respect
absolutely.
For one another.
And
respect,
we all benefit.
Respect
from
for the game, for the art, for the whole process. So it's filtered down. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
I asked for an interview and you gave me gold. It was awesome.
Send her an invoice.